5 now, so it's pulling that up. As soon as we get that, make sure that that goes through. It should. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear background noise?
No, I can hear you. How about me? Any background
No,
noise?
you're good. I didn't know if I needed to put my, if I needed to put the microphone in, but if it's working, it's working. All right, so we're on Zoom. We're going well. Yay! So, good evening, everyone. Thank you and welcome to Pep Talks. My name is Leon Theodore. I'm the host, and I'd like to welcome you to the living room. Thank you for joining us. This week's conversation is restorative justice. Is it the future of discipline? The disparities in our school discipline system, both nationally and here in Dallas, call attention to the need for change in our school culture. The use of zero tolerance practices and the over disciplining of youth of color, specifically Black youth, have continued the flow of Black boys and girls into the school to prison pipeline. Our educational system spends vast amounts of money for security services and minuscule amounts comparatively on the mental and emotional well-being of our youth. Systemic racism, racist practices, and policies have impacted communities of color, but specifically Black communities, creating wealth and achievement gaps that spill into our school system. Implicit bias, a lack of cultural awareness, consistently criminalize Black student behavior while dismissing and minimizing the same behavior in other students. Zero tolerance policies and practices are proven not to change students' behavior, but increase aggression and disengage youth from the learning process. Learning is not one size fits all. Moving our educational culture from deficit thinking toward a whole child approach is the goal of P.E.P. And I would like to welcome someone today who, again, I seem to admire all my guests, which is why I have you as guests. But I want to welcome Alycia Castillo, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. So, Alycia, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Leon. I'm so happy to be here right now. Yeah, I'm Alycia Castillo. I am a policy analyst at Texas Criminal Justice Coalition and get to work adjacent to Leon. And honestly, it's just been a pleasure as long as we've gotten to work together, especially on youth justice issues and education justice and dismantling the school to prison pipeline. And I'm just so pleased to be here tonight.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I want to get right into it. Um, eh, the new where education is going and where change is heading is the getting rid of exclusionary practices and policies that are kicking Black kids specifically at a disparaging rate out of classrooms. Um, but the thing that we're talking about and what's being discussed is what's going to replace the discipline policies and practices that we have. And it brings up heated discussion sometimes. And I'm just wondering, could you explain to people what restorative justice is? Because you are the
Mm.
queen of restorative justice.
No, no.
Yeah, this one's gonna
Um,
be kind of this episode's gonna be fun because we work together. So
so just a combo between a couple of friends. Everybody
right,
grab a drink, join us.
right. There
Yeah.
we go.
No, for sure. So there are a few different like definitions that float around, about this. But the when I think about the word justice, like just on its own, um, I've heard before or seen that we actually don't have a definition like in the dictionary of justice. Like we as a society have just collectively agreed that it's based on moral justice is moral and just behavior. But what is moral and just behavior, right? I think we all, whether we know it or not, go throughout our lives with our own unspoken definitions of justice. And for me, the definition goes back to just this idea of like what would it look like for everyone to get what they need? So when harm has been caused, what would it look like for the wrongdoer to make it right? And to get the person who was harmed what they need. And so restorative justice is really just like the community approach to this, from my perspective. And there are like longer definitions that I could cite if I had, like the little book of restorative justice and education in front of me. But that's how I picture it, like building and nurturing like interconnected communities that share mutual concern for one another, and with a shared understanding of what mutual concern and practice looks like. So that was really messy, but I hope something came through there.
It is messy, and that's why, it comes to the place of, okay, so how is this going to replace what we're used to in schools? And, when we're talking about zero tolerance practices, things such as kicking kids out for hairstyles, for throwing Skittles, for touching someone, and actually being given citations, things of that nature. It's just punitive now. But restorative justice, um, what that opens up is the opportunity for people to discuss situations, for kids and teachers and each party to actually talk about what's going on and to actually figure out a solution that's viable, right? That's not going to cause more harm than what's already been done. So, um, is restorative justice the only tool that we have in our
Hmm.
arsenal to replace?
It's that's a good question. I think um, when we're talking about restorative justice in education, I think we're often like picturing just a new like procedure to follow. And so when we're thinking of it that way, of course not, right? Like people are using positive behavioral interventions, people are using all these different like facets of multi-tiered support systems in schools, and they work in many cases. I mean, as an example, I'm a former educator. I worked with students with learning disabilities, and many students with different emotional disorders and things like that. And so those some of their behaviors manifested in physical action. Sometimes it was physical aggression, sometimes it was kicking a chair, kicking the door, like they're this is something that's present in like all children as they develop, right? We're not coming out of the womb with like this inherent knowledge of like how to manage conflict or how to even manage our own emotions. And so when you're a kid and just working it through, there are, lots of ways that happens. And so when I think of restorative justice or restorative approaches or practices, I picture like just the age appropriate response to harm or to repairing something that was broken. And so when we think about like alternatives to the harsh and punitive models that we've relied on for the entirety of the education system, I do think that the only thing that can stop this pattern and this cycle of exclusionary discipline, of racism in the like inherent in the structure of the institution of the public school system, we have to completely throw it out and completely rebuild something brand new. And to me, if we call it a multi-tiered system of support, great, that's awesome, as long as it's something that is restorative in nature and seeks to heal and repair in a way that's beneficial for all parties.
That sounds so. I'll jump into my next question, because you hit on it and you alluded to it, and what that was going to be is so. Is there a difference between restorative justice as a framework and then just the actual practices of restorative justice? You know what I mean? Because people again, like you said, people think, okay, is this just going to be something else to implement that's going to take up my time? I have to learn, blah, blah, blah. Is it going to be effective? And I think if we get the understanding that there is something that is put in place, changing how you think. So
Mm.
I'll let you answer that.
You remind me of a story of a high school student that I spoke with maybe 2 years ago. She was working on advocacy in her own school district to rewrite the student code of conduct to create a student bill of rights. And um, she shared that, she loved this idea of like restorative justice. And her specific school, I think she was in a magnet school, had done restorative justice. And she said that looked like putting all of us in a circle one day during class and making us like share the deepest, darkest things that were going on in our lives at the time. And then um, the bell ringing and us leaving. And she was like, that didn't work. That was not good. I didn't feel safe in that moment sharing my, the stuff that's going on at home. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. And I didn't want to feel pressured to do that either. And what did that solve for us? What did that help within our group? Nothing. And so she's like, if y'all are just going to try to throw us in circles and make us, regurgitate our trauma, we're better off on our own. We're better off without any of that. Um, and she's so right. I mean, a lot of times, like this implementation of things that are like, maybe like the intention is pure and good. If the implementation goes wrong, then actually more harm can be done. And I just imagine, a child not being properly cared for in a situation like that. Like if a child did share some trauma or something scary or dangerous that was happening at home in that space, who would have been there like to protect her in that, like if the bell rang and she just had to leave class. So
Yeah.
obviously that's a unique situation, but yeah, restorative practices without like a restorative framework that you're talking about, like a whole shift of the culture of the district, of the school, of the administration, of the staff, of the student to student interaction is not going to work. It's restorative justice is not like a little band-aid that you put on your existing like um, structure that's falling apart, right? We have to rebuild the whole thing. And so I appreciate you kind of couching this conversation in that context of like, okay, victim offender mediation sounds great. Like circles sound awesome, kumbaya, but what is an actual like successful model of restorative justice look like? And it's simply put, but not simply done, a culture shift.
No, no. And, I think so. uh, you and I both fight for like culture change, right? So we're talking about a mindset change. We're talking about changing culture completely. And what I really want to get across is that it's going to take a buy in from, like you said, the district. It's going to take a buy in from sites, principals to actually make a difference in how we approach discipline, how we see kids, how we think about what it means to discipline. And discipline, the actual meaning of discipline is just to show someone how to do. It's like being to be discipled. So you follow what's being led and what's being modeled in front of you. So if we're modeling uh punitive like thoughts and actions, no wonder we have kids acting out and doing things. And I mean, we're not modeling. So it takes, I think it's going to take a buy-in from the district. It's going to take a whole new, like you said, a new culture, a new mindset. And that's a difficult thing. So I'm going to go out on a limb and ask you, what do you think it would take? What do you think it would actually take to implement? Because we are in a place that we can actually start talking about, you know, making this a district-wide thing. We can make this a school-wide uh, action or mindset. So how would you see this being implemented?
I want to acknowledge like that just as like every child like deserves an individualized approach to their education and to their social emotional learning, um, so do communities. Like each community, like communities are not a monolith, you know? And so like even when we're talking about things like discipline, like we are seeing exclusionary practices across the state. It's it's pretty much a pattern that Black and brown kids are being disproportionately over disciplined. Um, that's kind of the one common thing, though. The way that that is enacted or implemented in different districts is going to vary, and the way people receive um, this theory, you know, of restorative justice and restorative discipline is going to vary too. And so taking into account that like each county, each district, each school has their own culture, and it being, you know, in our own way that we talk about this, um, using a restorative framework for that, and meeting people where they are, meeting communities where they are, and then, you know, helping them find out what they need to get to the place they want to go is going to have to happen. So as much as, you know, I work on like the state level policy for these things, and am a huge advocate for the bills that are seeking to you know, direct districts to implement restorative practices, I know that it's going to look different from county to county. And then the other thing is acknowledging like the fears that different folks have about adopting a new culture. It's really scary to think about the true threats that face children in schools every day, right? Like we are coming out of a tragic, tragic week. We're in a tragic week right now, um, reckoning with America's struggle with guns. And it's been most like painfully apparent in our schools when the tragedy of mass shootings have occurred and put the littlest, most vulnerable people in our society in danger. And so this response that came out of the 90s, right? Communities, uh, policing in schools, the COPS program, all this additional funding that came. And then after the real tragedy in 2000 with Columbine, just seeing that reinforced and just that structure like invested in even more, makes sense. We saw this problem and our community said, we have to fix this. And the only response that we've relied on all this time is policing. Well, the data is showing us, and it has showed us that it's not a solution. It's actually not stopping those tragedies from occurring. And in fact, it's compounding harm for those underserved populations we talked about earlier. And so what it's going to take for us to be ready to do something different, I think, is acknowledging those facts that we've tried this solution and it didn't work. And in fact, it hurt many people. And so now, when are we ready to try something different? And so we do have restorative practices are a research-based and an evidence-based model of responding to harm in schools. And so no problem there. We have the data, we have the research on our sides. And in order for it to like work in practice, it's going to take a lot of investment to completely divest from something that the old way that you've always done things and to try something entirely new. And unfortunately, the research also shows us that successful implementation of restorative practices in schools takes about 6 or 7 years. So that's about 6-ish years of struggle and of that painful growth process of trying something and failing and learning from that, and trying again and failing again and learning from that until you get to a place where you want to go. And I shared this earlier. I was talking with Andrew Harrison, another one of our friends, and Amber Watts. She's with Austin Justice Coalition and the Restorative Justice Coordinator in Austin Independent School District. And she kind of confirmed, like, it's just like this painful process, and they're in about year 3 right now, and it's still growing pains. Yeah. But this illustration that that is usually painted about restorative justice and education is an illustration of a flower. And like when the seed is planted, it's in the dark under the ground, and it takes time for these roots to grow and then for them to really root into the ground. And it takes time after that for something to pop up from the ground. And it takes time after that for something to bloom from that. And so this dark period of like the seed being nurtured and nourished and building the strong roots to grow into something meaningful and impactful is a hard place to be. And you can't see all the good stuff that's happening. But it's necessary, because if there are no roots, the flower is never going to grow. And so that's the other thing. Schools that have had success with whole school implementation of restorative justice have stuck out those dark, hard, painful times and come out on the other end to see that bloom at last. And so finding folks who not only have the willingness to engage in that hard growing process, but also have the resources to engage in that is what is the real challenge is. And so I think we'd be hard pressed to find a teacher out there that says, I hate restorative practices, or I don't like this idea of age appropriate responses to behavior. That would be tricky. Maybe they exist, but that would be tricky to find. And those who do vehemently come out in opposition to ideas of, implementation of restorative practices are those who feel that they don't have the resources to implement that. We would love to, if we had an extra 12 hours in the day to learn about this and to, effectively apply it, but we don't, and so teachers, bless them, they're just some of the hardest working people in our society and most important people in our society. And we it's historically just they're also underserved folks, and asking them to do something brand new that's going to take a lot of work is just something that's really hard to do if we don't follow that up with investment in them and in the process. So to summarize, I would say that the things that we need to make it happen are a realization and an acceptance, just a pure acceptance that we've tried policing, we've tried exclusionary discipline, it's not working. Accept that. Once we accept that, we have to be willing to invest in an alternate solution. And once we're ready to do that, I think we'll have the buy-in of all the folks that we need to make it happen.
That's a perfect answer. That's a perfect answer. You have to give me 1 second. Of course, nobody's here with me right now. And this one, the little one his stomach's all messed up. Give me 1 second.
Sorry, Chaco. Feel better soon.
The joys of doing things at home. Yay!
Yay! We're not working from home. We're living at work.
Right. So, I was when you listening to you, you do such a great job of describing what I think, what we really need, and that it is going to take effort. I mean, but look at how long it took us to get to where we are with policing. And that was just continuing to do things. I know, right? I'm trying to be nice. You know how I'm trying to be nice.
It could be better.
Right. Well, I was last week when I talked to Mr. Webb, and he used to be an officer, and he was saying that, people talk about people are concerned about their safety, their kids' safety, like there's going to be shootings, but then we end up seeing overuse of SROs in schools that have historically have never had shootings, right? In populations that have never had shootings, mass shootings, and you know, when are we going to change our mindsets to the fact that yes, those do happen, but where we see the issues historically, there's no mass shootings, right? There's no reason for the overuse of police officers or the overuse of SROs. And then when we're talking about discipline, it gets down to where I am now is, just the teachers are experts. They're the experts. They're the ones that are dealing with our kids. That we need to have their buy-in. We need to have their voice heard. We need to have parents, students heard. All of that, which is part of restorative justice, because that's to me that's where we're going to see the issues, popping up between students, between teachers and students. And I just think that if we, like you said, shut down the thought process and the mind, the thinking processes that we have in place, and be willing to do the work and put the money towards where we're doing the work, that we can actually see some changes. So it's not going to be give programs to the kids, diversity and equity and inclusion for the teachers, and trauma training. All those are great, but if you're not changing everything, the whole mindset, we're just putting band-aids on. So, and I just am looking forward to seeing what we're going to get to with this and how it's going to be implemented. And are people going to actually buy in? Are districts going to buy in? Are sites going to buy in? I want to ask you what your utopia would look like.
That's a big one.
Yes.
Yeah. So before I get to that, just because it's like it's weighing on me now, just like in context of the week that we've had, I want to like acknowledge and validate like the pain and the horror and the absolute egregiousness of the fact that we still have this problem of mass shootings, and that I hear what you're saying is a really interesting point, that these, the historically underserved or over policed communities, Black and brown kids in low socioeconomic districts, that's not where we're seeing these issues crop up as often. But the thing that we do have to acknowledge is that one school shooting is too many. We talk about the low percentage, like the actual rate of how frequently that occurs, and it's so like the actual rate, it's not something on a wide scale that happens often, and it's something that should never ever happen again, not even once. And so preventing it from happening should be of the utmost importance to districts and to leaders in our community, and doing everything that we can to ensure that no child is unsafe in a school is urgent, absolutely. And we have to look at what the things are that are most likely to prevent it from ever happening again. And I think we've had trouble with actually looking at that. when we've looked at the data and seen that the FBI data actually shows that the police intervention in these events of violence are point percentage, like incredibly small, that they have never been the evidence-based answer to preventing or stopping one of these events in action, right? And so, yes, we have to stop school shootings and prevent them from ever happening again. Unfortunately, police aren't doing that. It would be great if they were, but they're not. So we have to look at what is actually going to prevent that. And what the research tends to point to is this idea of the perpetrators who do these heinous acts had a lot of issues leading up to that terrible offense. And what would it have looked like if they had the supports that they needed all along to intervene in their lives to prevent that from ever getting to that point? And I think one of the reasons that people say no about restorative justice is because it looks like a soft approach to like bad behavior or whatever. And I don't think that one of those kids, when they were exhibiting those behaviors all along throughout their school process, their education career, that it would have been soft to get them the mental health intervention that they needed to ensure that they never got to that level. That doesn't sound soft to me. That sounds smart. That sounds like the right thing to do. And if we can ensure that all children have access to that kind of support and that kind of care and that kind of mental health, behavioral health intervention early, I think that that's one of the best ways that we can get at making sure that a child never loses their lives in a classroom ever again. So I think we share, and I don't want that to get lost in our conversations about alternatives, right, to exclusionary discipline, that we share deeply this, the sorrow and in the mourning of the fact that these events are still happening, and we want to find the best solution to it. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that and like validate those concerns.
Right. Yes.
Those concerns are so real, and every parent that's gonna say, no, I'm not good with, taking cops out of school until these stop happening, I validate that I can see why that sounds right, And so I guess a utopia would be a world where we have the resources, that everyone has the resources they need to get that kind of care to prevent those things from happening, and to ensure that every student has the opportunity to thrive and succeed, no matter their background or what their learning level is, or no matter what's happening in their environment, that they can get the care that they need to succeed. And so, yeah, even outside of education, that's my utopia for the whole world, that everyone gets what they need. And that's what justice is. And so, yeah, I guess in my utopia, there would also be like a lot of dogs like around me. Maybe also I wouldn't be lactose intolerant and I could eat ice cream, and that would be part of it. And then, yeah, and then I think we're good, and justice, and then I think we're good.
Right. I think, always do, but what you said to me sounds like there's a saying that says an ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure. Right. And what we're talking about is doing, when you were talking about the school shootings and you were saying, that if the kids had had this all along, possibly it would, that we could affect change. And I think, we talk a lot about funding and we talk about where we spend our money. and, like with the spend your values. And when you see that you actually, if you put the resources where they're needed and create space for it, then you can prevent a lot of things that we're seeing the outcomes of years of people not receiving what they need.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about with discipline. That's what we're talking about with exclusionary practices. We're talking about systemic things that have been affecting communities for years. And you see the outcomes of those, but just a few, an ounce of prevention, if we start doing that, I think. And to me, that looks like, for me, that is the funding, that is the resources, like what you were saying earlier. And I mean, I think restorative justice, the framework, it's not, like you said, it's not just the practices, but the framework, um, backed with the resources, would do what we think, what we're hoping for. So, um, is restorative justice the future of discipline?
It has to be. Yeah. We can't go on the way that we have been. Our kids deserve better. Um, in a world uh, where we can claim true equity, um, it has to be our answer, because until then, racism and implicit bias uh, are always going to come into play, if there aren't guardrails for, not only mitigating that, but eliminating that. And until we're willing to adopt an entirely new lens of relating to one another, not just to students, I mean, to humanizing one another, um, we're never going to be the people or the society that we want to be. And so, inherent in like this idea of restorative practices, justice responses, is this idea that like your inherent dignity, worth, and value um, is something that I see and that you see in me. And when we all agree upon that and see that in one another, um, it's going to be a lot harder for us to say you don't belong, or you are a disruption, or you are a bad kid, or you are a bad student. Um, that doesn't happen when we're humanizing one another. So if we can root our responses in that value, um, that's the future that I think most of us are striving for.
I'm going to leave that right there, because that's what we're working towards. It's humanizing. That's the diversity, equity, and inclusion. That all the trainings, we're just talking about that. That you're valuable. You're worthwhile. How I see you for who you could be, and who you can, and who you are. So, I want to thank you for today. I know you've been incredibly busy fighting for on the state level, and just the day to day. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for your knowledge and your expertise. And tell us a little bit about. I try to give people a place to talk about what they're doing and what's coming up. So take a little time to do that.
Ooh,
Yeah.
thank you. I'd love to. Here's how you can support. No, seriously though, a call to action. Thank you. I want to do that for anybody who's with us or watching this later on. There are some tangible ways that you can actually support this in your own community right now. And so, when do you get that opportunity? When you're talking about theory and fun ideas and ideology? Not always. So, take this opportunity. Texas is currently in our 87th legislative session. The legislature meets every 2 years to come together for 6 months and make laws that affect all Texans. And this session, I'm working on our youth justice and our women's justice issues. And in youth justice, we're really looking at two things: youth decarceration and education justice. So getting kids out of prison and keeping them from ever going in the first place via the school to prison pipeline. And there are some great bills that are on deck that you can support. And so today we were talking about restorative justice, so I'll mention those. A few bills that you can support are ones like HB 62. This is Representative Tallarico's bill that seeks to direct districts to create a restorative response to wrongdoing in schools, and to utilize that prior to any action of exclusionary discipline, suspension, expulsion, whatever it might be. And if the student so chooses to engage in it, because that's another facet of restorative justice, that is voluntary, right? You can't force somebody to want to repair harm. So there's that, and with it, it's going to establish a council of folks to help the implementation of restorative practices in districts across the state. And the council, there's new language coming up in the bill that will be introduced when it comes up for its hearing that will include a peer support specialist. So someone with lived experience on the other side, someone who didn't get the services that they needed on the front end and got them at the back end, and are now working to provide those services to others. It's going to include students. Student representation is one of the most overlooked issues, like in our districts right now, that all these decisions are made for kids without them being part of it. So having students on the council, there will be folks who are practitioners of restorative justice. There will be just a great group of people there to support the implementation of restorative justice across districts. And I'm super excited about that. So if you care about restorative justice, please find your legislator. You can go to just Google who represents me Texas and type in your zip code or your address, and you'll see who represents you. That's who you want to talk to. You can just pick up the phone, call their office and let them know you support HB 62 and let them know why. You can also email them. And if you're Austin based and vaccinated, feel free to go into the Capitol and meet with your representatives or come to a hearing and testify on behalf of the bill that you like. So that's one of them. And there's a whole slate of good bills that you can check out on our website, texascjc.org. Go to our youth justice page, and there you can see all the issues we work on and all the bills that relate to them.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, just a plug.
I knew you were waiting for that. I love doing that. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming in and listening. Thank you for all of the parents, to all the students, the teachers. Thank you for the work you do, for the advocates, and thank you for making this possible and giving us a voice a place to let our voices be heard. Next week's show will be about equity in teaching and what that looks like, education for all. So join us then. That's in 2 weeks. That's going to be on April 8th. But tonight, I just want to say again, thank you, Alycia, for joining us, and everyone have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Leon.
Bye-bye.